All right. Hello. So, um, sit or stand, sit or stand. All right, I'm going to try sitting. If it doesn't work, I'll stand. But, all right, yeah, I think this might work. So, um, who knows what season we're in? What are we doing right now? St. Mary's Fast. And how long is St. Mary's Fast? 2 weeks. At one point, St. Mary's Fast was 3 weeks. And some people still kind of celebrate it as a 3-week fast now. But the vast majority of people celebrate it as a 2-week fast. So since this Thursday happened to fall right in the middle of it, I figured, hey, what's better time to talk to St. Mary than now? But there's so much stuff about St. Mary, right? Like, people talk about St. Mary all the time. Has anybody here ever read anything about St. Mary? Seriously? Nobody? Nobody's ever read anything about St. Mary? All right. Like in the Bible, okay? I mean, I was just thinking, like, there's a lot of, like, St. Mary books written about her dormition, her virginity. Like, there's a ton of different books. Nothing? No one? All right. Very good. Does anybody, do we all know, like, St. Mary? Like, is she an important figure in Christianity? What do you guys think? Like, somewhat? Yeah. We just don't read about her? It's not interesting enough? Very good. All right. I can't believe you guys haven't read about St. Mary. Like, this is really kind of like, this is bothering me. Like,
What books have you read that we have not? Can you share? You're like, I don't know, maybe I didn't, I just don't remember. Like, what books have you been reading?
I mean, there's a lot written about her. Like, a lot of different church fathers write about her dormition. Her virginity was attacked over the years. The fact that she is the mother of God, the Theotokos, and, like, what does that mean? Why is she not just the mother of Jesus? Like, there's just a ton that's been written about her. Theological books, there's church fathers that write, like, entire homilies about her. There's hymns all about Saint Mary. Are the front seats taken? Is that why? Did you guys? Is this like pink? People in pink sit in the back. Is that what's happening? What? You have to break your neck. I see that. Too close for too long. Riding in the same bus for like 2 weeks. I don't have his favorite Saint Mary book, but there's a book that I like reading. I read it a couple of times, and I'm not great with titles, but it focuses on her dormition and what happened when she died. And I think, there's just like a lot of talks about, like, oh, where's her body? Like, is it in heaven? Is it in paradise? Is it anywhere specific? And there's just people talk about that all the time. No people in this room, obviously, but some people talk about that all the time. Anyway, all right. Forget that question. At least we know who Saint Mary is, right? Everybody knows who Saint Mary is. She's the mother of God. She's great. Well, I have great news, right? Jesus chose her for himself. But not just that. He chose her for himself, and he chose her for us. So that's kind of the focus of what we're going to do today, right? I want us, like, the whole thing is like maybe 7 slides, right? I don't have a ton of slides, and it's going to be very short. But on every slide, I want you to wonder, what does it mean he chose her for us, right? I mean, we know she's the mother of God. She's the Theotokos. She carried him. She gave birth to him. She was there at the cross. He gave her to St. John. But I want you to think for us, okay, as we talk about everything. There we go. So, first thing I wanted us to talk about is the fact that she was chosen, right? There are billions of women that have lived on this earth. There are probably billions more that are going to live on this earth. But out of them, just one, right? And when you read some of the church fathers, a lot of them will say that a part of the design was for St. Mary, right? She was a part of the design of salvation. She wasn't a side character. She was a main character. Besides Christ, obviously, character number one, she is the second character in all of salvation. So sometimes people take St. Mary and think about her in this like background character, right? And that's, I think, by design what she did for herself, right? She didn't speak much. She always just thought and prayed. But in doing so, we don't see a lot in the Bible about St. Mary. So we kind of think about St. Mary as the great mother of God, but in the story of salvation, we almost like put her in the background. Like, okay, she delivered Jesus, and then she just sat back. But that's not quite it. And that's why she was chosen, right? Like, she really had to play a very, very important role, and we'll understand a little bit about that role today. St. Augustine says, she conceived him in her heart before she conceived him in her womb. That's one of those things that's really important, because the next quote is kind of like confusing. So I wanted to make sure we understand the next quote by this quote, okay? St. Augustine also says, he knew his mother in predestination. Of course, that word confuses everybody, so just take a deep breath, and we'll explain it in a second. He knew his mother in predestination even before he was born of her, even before as God. He created her of whom, as man, he was to be created. He knew her as his mother. But we get confused by this concept of predestination. Now I want you to put that inside the other quote. She conceived him in her heart before she conceived him in her womb. What does that mean? That means that because God knew how she would have him in her heart, how she would live a life of humility, how she would live a life of obedience, how she would be the perfect one that he can come and take flesh from, that's why it uses the word predestined her, right? This concept of God's foreknowledge and the word predestination, when you put it together, you have to put in between the two words, the will of man, right? So she was chosen because of who she was going to be, because of what her heart was going to look like, right? Because when she was in the temple, I think her parents died at 6 and at 8 years old. So by 8 years old, she had entered the temple. And from 8 to about 13, she's in the temple, and she has no parents. But I was listening to a sermon from Pope Shenouda, and Pope Shenouda said a sentence that was really cool. He said, when she lost both her parents, she dedicated all her energy and all her attention to loving the Lord. So sometimes, like St. Paul says, I wish you were all as I am, that he was single, right? And he can just give all his attention to the Lord. And he says that, it's okay to be married, but I know that marriage is going to, grab your attention here. You got to cook, you got to clean, you got to take care of your wife, you got to take care of your kids. So there's a little bit of distraction, right? And Pope Shenouda was saying, when her parents died and she went into the temple, she didn't go and search for other distractions. She took all of her attention and geared it towards the Lord. Now, God knew all that. God knew that there's this little girl named Mary, and that she is going to be born, and her parents are going to die, and she's going to go into the temple, and she's going to choose to take all her attention and to give it to him, and to wholly dedicate herself to him. And that's why, from a very young age, in her mind, she had determined, I'm going to be a virgin forever, right? I'm just going to dedicate my life to the Lord. I'm going to be a virgin. So when the angel came to her and said, hey, I got some news for you. Plans are about to change, right? You're about to give birth to a baby. The one thing she said is, well, how come? I've never known a man. I don't plan on knowing a man, right? How is this going to happen? So she was chosen. She was chosen because a part of salvation was Jesus was going to be the new Adam. But the new Adam also needs what? It's on the screen, guys. He needs a new Eve, right? So he needed someone that was going to be so obedient that there's no disobedience in her like there was in Eve. And that's St. Mary. There couldn't be a new Adam without a new Eve. Although salvation comes from Christ, he wanted a new Eve standing next to him, taking part of this salvation plan, just as Adam and Eve both took part in the fall of man. So it's really important, and this fact is very, very important, because sometimes we argue back and forth like men and women, like who's the reason why we fell? I mean, it doesn't really matter, right? Like two people fell, and although Christ was our salvation, he chose to make sure that there was a new Eve next to him, so that way men can never look at women and say, oh, you're the reason we fell. Well, there was a woman there also a part of the story of salvation. Saint Irenaeus of Lyon says, the knot of Eve's disobedience was loosed by the obedience of Mary. For what the virgin Eve had bound fast through unbelief, this did the Virgin Mary set free through faith. Now remember, I told you every slide we're going to go through, I want you to think for us. For us, right? What St. Mary was doing when she had this much faith is she was setting humanity on a place, on a way forward that says you don't have to be like the first Adam and Eve, right? Here I am, a woman born, choosing to be obedient. And after Christ dies and resurrects and goes to heaven, he gives us so much more power to be able to do that. Like St. Mary was able to do something that no other human really was going to do, right? And just be that obedient. But then Christ comes and gives us his divine power through salvation to say, I'm not just going to leave you like that. I'm going to give you even more power to be called sons of the living God, so you can resist all temptation, so you can step on serpents, scorpions, all the power of the enemy, right? So when he chose her for him, he also chose her for us as an example. Here's the interesting thing. Who knew that this little girl was going to be the mother of God when she was born? What? God. Only God. No angels knew. No archangels knew. It was only revealed to them when Archangel Gabriel received the message to go give to St. Mary. So, one of the biggest secrets in humanity, who is going to be the one that Jesus comes from? Many, many women in the Old Testament would want that honor, right? Let me be the mother of God. Let me be the one that he comes from. Let me be the one that helps fulfill the promise. And that's why women in the Old Testament, when they were barren, they were filled with reproach, right? Because if you're barren, you are for sure not going to be chosen to be the one that participates in this plan of salvation. I was listening the other day to something, and they were asking, one of the abunas was asking, and then he answered, obviously, but he said, why do you guys think the women that were barren in the Old Testament were barren? Like Sarah, Rachel, all these women were barren before they gave birth. St. John's mother, Elizabeth, barren before she gives birth. Why? What's the reason? God was giving hope to the hopeless?
The ones who were furthest away from expecting to be that, to receive the honor were the ones who had.
What was he building, though? What was he building? Faith in who?
I think in the woman and their husbands and him.
I think he was building faith in the future people that would receive Christ. So, the way Abuna explained it, which I thought was really interesting, I had never really thought about it this way, but I figured I would share it with you guys. Knowing that God can take a woman who is barren and beyond childbirth age and giving her the ability to give birth shows that God is in control of what? How birth happens, no matter what, right? Nothing is outside of his control. So he builds throughout the Old Testament all these examples of barren women, all the way up to who? Elizabeth. The one that is used in the Annunciation by the angel as an example of how nothing is beyond God's power to St. Mary. Because when St. Mary says, how is this going to be to me? I've never known a man. What is the example he gives her of like something crazy that just happened as like a way to help her understand? He says, oh, by the way, Elizabeth, who is barren, she's pregnant. So all these examples were to set everyone's mind at ease that when a virgin can give birth, look, you've seen a lot of barren women give birth. Yes, this one's a little bit different. This one's even higher because she's about to give birth to Christ himself. But remember that there's so many examples of God working the impossible, right? A 90-year-old woman giving birth is impossible, right? You've gone through menopause, you're not producing eggs anymore, it's impossible, right? So she was chosen, she was the new Eve, and she is his mother. St. Ephraim the Syrian says, you alone and your mother are more beautiful than any others, for there is no blemish in you or any stains upon your mother. All right, I'm done sitting. Sorry. I tried to do it for the whole time. I can't. I thought this was a really cool quote because one of the things that I think hinders us when we think about St. Mary is we think of her as something that is unattainable. Like, whenever we tell somebody, like, oh, struggle for perfection. Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. What do people usually say? I'm just human. I'm just human. I'm just human, as if that's an excuse, right? Well, Jesus chose a human, a little 13-year-old girl named Mary, and she is without blemish, right? Now, you can read the church father writings, and some of them will say, that started at when she conceived Christ. Some of them will say it was before, but all say that after, and from the point of conception moving forward, she is without blemish. Is she without blemish because Jesus added something to her extra? Like, did he give her like a little button, like to turn off sin or turn off desire? No, right? But he did choose her because of who she is. Because she is someone who chooses to be obedient, chooses to live humbly, chooses not to speak too much. Somebody raise your hand and tell me, why is speaking too much always going to lead to sin? Like, if we have to start thinking about things I need to delete out of my life if I want to be perfect as my Father in heaven is perfect, one of the things is going to be what? Talking. You just talk too much, there's just no way. Why is that? How? It's funny, I'm looking at your faces and I feel like the ladies are a little bit annoyed by the idea that I'm saying less talking. The guys are like, I don't really talk that much anyway. But why? Why is talking problematic? I talk a lot, by the way, so I'm on the ladies' side. I find that very difficult, yes? Because you're not thinking before you're talking. Idle words do nothing for you. You're actually going to be judged for every idle word you will speak. So yes.
I don't remember the verse, but where it says like the power of life and death exists in the tongue, in the sharpness of the tongue.
Very good. What else? Mhm. Our tongue is a sure way to hell. There's no question. The more we use it, the more we will gossip, the more we will sin by saying things we shouldn't say. Have you ever thought to yourself of a joke and you're like, I don't know if this is appropriate or not appropriate. And then you sound it out loud, and after you sound it out loud, you're like, I shouldn't have said it. Has anybody done that before? No? Yes? Okay. All right, there's more people here. Has anybody ever read any books about St. Mary? Still? What is wrong with you people? What? Probably eventually? Yeah. Nothing? You didn't know there's books just about her? Wait. Okay, books about the miracles. Okay. All right, that's in the vein. That's good. All right, one person. I wonder how many more people it would take for me to find somebody. Anyway. In Psalm 45:9, it says, King's daughters are among your honorable women. At your right hand stands the queen in gold from Ophir. St. Mary was so special that she is going to sit in a place where no one sits in heaven. No archangel, no angel, no prophet, no apostle. She's going to sit at the right hand of the king. She's going to sit at the right hand of Christ himself, right? But that is because you alone and your mother are more beautiful than any others, for there is no blemish in you, nor any stains upon your mother. To me, St. Mary is hope for us. Once again, she was chosen for him and for us. She's hope. Because if a human that had no divinity in her can sit at the right hand of the king, then there's definitely hope for me to at least make it into the kingdom, right? As long as I follow her example. One of which, less words. Less words. St. Mary was also described as a cloud. For him, and I'll tell you how it is for us. In Isaiah 19:1, it says, Behold, the Lord rides on a swift cloud and will come into Egypt. The idols of Egypt will totter at his presence, and the heart of Egypt will melt in its midst. Now, we just went to Egypt. There's a group that just went to Egypt on mission trip. And we went, and one of the places we visited was a church where St. Mary and Christ slept in a cave, hiding from people. And we literally saw a little thing where St. Mary used to lay Christ on it, and like a well where he drank from, and she drank from. There's several spots like that all throughout Egypt. So in Isaiah 19:1, the swift cloud that the Lord is riding on, St. Mary herself, right? She carries him throughout Egypt for those 3 years. He's in Egypt for 3 years, and he's running from city to city to city to city, because every time he goes somewhere, all the idols break down, and the people of that city throw them out. And they say, you're not welcome here. So we get the blessing today that Christ went practically throughout all of Egypt, being chased around by people, right? The only country in the world that can say Jesus visited almost every place in it. So for him, she was a cloud that carried him. But when you read also in the Bible, there's mentions of a cloud being a shade, a source of shade, right? And when you think about St. Mary and her relationship with us, we look at St. Mary as the number one intercessor in the church, right? Whether you love St. George, whether you love St. Mina, whether you love St. Cyril, no matter who your intercessor is, usually if you're smart enough. St. Mary is your number one intercessor and everybody else comes after her, right? Why? Because she sits at the right hand of the king. Because she is the closest to his ears. Because she is willing to be a shade for all of us, right? And just like she offered her son to us, she also offers us to her son, right? So it's kind of important to remember that she was a cloud to him by carrying him throughout his journeys as a child, and she's a cloud to us today by serving as shade, as a source of intercession for each one of us. St. Cyril the Great says, "The glittering cloud which carried the child Jesus to Egypt was his mother, St. Mary, who surpassed the cloud in purity." So you can look at a cloud and it's really white. Well, St. Mary's even whiter than that. That's how pure she is. I added some of these quotes from the church fathers just so you guys see, somebody like Cyril the Great was in the 400s. Somebody like Irenaeus was 100 something. So Augustine, 300 to 400, whatever he is. The church has always had this relationship with St. Mary, right? Sometimes people look at our relationship with St. Mary today and they think of it as oh, why are you guys so attached to St. Mary? We're not. The church always has been, right? So when you go back and you look at the church fathers and what they wrote, St. Mary was a consistent topic in their mind, right? Because she represented so much more in the plan of salvation, in her relationship with us, and of course, in her relationship with her Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. And we come to the fact that she's our mother. In the Gospel of St. John, chapter 19, verses 26 and 27, it says, "When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing by, he said to his mother, 'Woman, behold your son.' Then he said to the disciple, 'Behold your mother.' And from that hour, that disciple took her to his own home." Now, when you're a little kid, you learn, is it the 7 things? I was a bad little kid, so I didn't learn too much. The 7 things that Jesus said on the cross, right? But this is one of them. So out of all the breaths that he can barely take, he took 7 breaths and said 7 things, and this is one of them, right? And of course, as a little child, the thing you really focus on is what? Jesus really loves his mother. He wanted to make sure she's taken care of before he died, which is true. That's a part of the equation, right? But my question to you is this. Was Jesus really worried about where she was going to sleep that night? Was that the thing? There was 12 apostles, there was Mary and Martha, there was Lazarus, there was a bunch of people, right? St. Mary was not going to have a hard time finding a home to sleep in. But he did. He wanted to show care for his mother before he goes. But what was the other reason that he gives her to St. John? What is Jesus doing for us? To who? Why specifically John? There were other Marys there. Why specifically John? He could have told one of the other Marys, "Mary, take Mary to be your mother."
John represents, one of his disciples, so he represents the church as one of the priests as well.
St. John represents the apostles. He represents the church and represents all believers moving forward. So when Christ gives St. Mary to St. John, he doesn't just give her to John, the person that happened to be standing there. He gives her to the entirety of the apostles. He gives her to all the believers that are going to come out of the church. And that's why in the book of Revelation, I don't know, did we go through it already? We did, right? Let's see. Oh, just kidding. That's the next one. "Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, on her head a garland of 12 stars. When the church father looked at that verse in the book of Revelation, they all interpreted it in two ways. That woman is the church, and that woman is Saint Mary. Right? So there is this connection that from that moment that Christ gives Saint Mary to Saint John, that connection never goes away. That connection is between Saint Mary and her motherhood to the church and all of us through the church. So when we live our lives away from someone like Saint Mary, we are spiritually missing our mother, which is dangerous, right? Like when you ask people psychologically, like therapists, what's the best thing for a child? Is to have a good, healthy father and a good, healthy mother. Healthy childhood is the best thing for a person, right? Can't do any better. It's the same thing spiritually, right? Our Lord is our Father, and the church is our mother, but the church lives inside of St. Mary. So if I don't have a relationship with her, I am missing out on a lot. Especially when Christ used one of the 7 breaths he spoke with on the cross to hand her to us in the form of St. John and say, "Woman, behold your son. Behold your sons and daughters." From that hour, that disciple took her to his own home. So today, as you walk out of here, I want you just to ask yourself a question. Have I taken her to my home? Have I taken St. Mary to my home? Do I understand her role in my life? Or am I kind of like busy? You know, I say our Father, I speak to Jesus, maybe. But yet he left me an entire family. He left me a mother. On the cross, he left me a mother, right? Do I know that? But once again, he chose her for himself, and he chose her for us. She is a mother to him, and she is a mother to us. This is the most important piece. The Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 12, 49 and 50. It says, "And he stretched out his hand towards his disciples and said, 'Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother.'" In this part of the Bible, they're telling Jesus, your mother and your brothers are waiting for you outside. And interestingly, he says, "Here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and my sister and my mother." And some people took that as kind of like lowering the stance of St. Mary. Like, oh, he made everybody equal. That's not what the church understood this to be. So when you go back and you read the church fathers in the early church, they understood that actually Christ was elevating everyone else, not bringing St. Mary down. Was saying that obedience, just as his mother was obedient, is the key. So anybody who is obedient like his mother, anybody who takes her as the example, anybody who strives for this level of obedience gets to become the family of God. So once again, he chooses someone that is going to serve as an example, because whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. Now, if Jesus had said that sentence or that verse without a human example, we would have a problem. We would say, well, I guess none of us will be your brother and mother and sister, right? Like, who can do that? But he gives us a fully human example, right? Because I don't know how many times I tell my kids something about Jesus, and they're like, yeah, but that's Jesus. I'm just a human. So my natural next answer is what? What about St. Mary? Okay, like you don't want to live up to Christ's image, although that is what we're called to do. Fine. What about St. Mary? Here's a woman, completely human, no divinity in her. So Jesus chose her for himself because she was going to be the only one that can have the Son of God living inside of her, being born of her, and show zero pride in the process. So now I have to wonder, what is it that I have pride about? My job? Like, is it in my job description to be the Father of God? Is it in your job description to be the Mother of God? No. Then your job sucks. You should not have pride. What else do I have pride in? My looks? I mean, I know I look great, but like, just it's okay. Like, besides that, what else do I have pride in? What else can I stand in front of the Lord, and when He tells me, John, why were you full of pride? What excuse will I give? Because His perfect example, as He asks me that question, is going to say, what? Look to my right, John. Who's sitting here? I'm going to say, oh, it's St. Mary. He says, okay, she was the mother of God, and she had no pride in her. So when I start fighting against my pride, I need to fight with hope. I need to fight with an understanding that it's doable if I'm really fighting. But her humility didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a practice of obedience. So believe it or not, humility is born from obedience, right? You have to practice obedience, and humility will be born inside your heart. She was obedient since the age of 8. He said, you're going to go to the temple. That's where you're going to live. She said, okay. The angel appears to her 5 years later, or 7 years later. What's my math? 6 years later, whatever it is. And says, hey, you're no longer going to be a virgin. You're going to have a baby. And she says, okay. You're going to change my plans? Okay. Let it be to me according to your plan, to your will. At no point does St. Mary choose anything for herself. She's told you're going to be the mother of God. She accepts that. But then she's told what? Run to Egypt. Because you're going to run away for 3 years because somebody's trying to kill you. But what do you mean somebody's trying to kill me? I'm the mother of God. Why aren't there angels coming down here and protecting this whole area? I probably would have asked that question, but that's why I could never be the mother of God, right? Like, my expectations would be, I'm going to have an angel army protecting me. Her expectation was, I'm the mother of God, I run to Egypt. That's okay. That fits. Like, at no point did she measure ahead, right? She wasn't like, oh, you called me the mother of God, then this, and this must happen. I'm the mother of God, then I'm going to go to Elizabeth and serve her in her last 3 months of pregnancy. She arrives at Elizabeth, and Elizabeth says what to her? At the sound of your voice. So I give a lot of talks, right? I've never had anybody tell me at the sound of your voice the Holy Spirit entered me. I think that would blow my mind, and I would never come back from pride. Like, I would lose my mind if somebody said that to me. But St. Mary, somebody did say that to her. At the sound of your voice, I was filled of the Holy Spirit, and the baby leaped in my womb. Did that change anything about St. Mary? Nothing. After hearing that sentence, she serves her for 3 months, comes back, is accused by Joseph. Oh, you went away for 3 months and now you're pregnant? Great. I'm going to put you away just because I don't want to make an example out of you. You know what I would have done if I was St. Mary? I would have called down an angel and just like killed him. But that's why I'm not St. Mary, right? What does St. Mary do? Nothing. She stays silent. You're going to be the mother of God. Okay, I'm being accused of adultery here. But that's fine. That's just a part of the plan. So she stays silent. I just want you guys to understand that every step St. Mary took, she practiced obedience. When she was being accused, she practiced obedience. When she was being filled with words that would make anybody else prideful, she practiced obedience in the fact that I am just a little girl. I should not think of myself higher than I am. So when God chose her for himself, and he chose her for us, it is because there is nothing about Saint Mary that I cannot use in my daily life to fight whatever I'm going through. She's an example in everything. She can handle praise and never get filled. She can handle being accused and never be angry. She can handle running in Egypt for 3 years. Who went to Egypt mission trip? We were there for 2 weeks. Can you run around the desert for 3 years? Saint Mary did that with a baby on a donkey with Saint Joseph. As the mother of God. We were complaining that like the heat wasn't like the AC wasn't working at night. She didn't complain for 3 years being chased throughout Egypt. And like we saw one of the living conditions that she lived in. It was a cave. Literally a cave. By the time we saw the cave, there was lights, there was stairs. You know, they had like nice things that you can eat in the canteen outside. When she was in that cave, there was nothing. Like it was just sand and a cave, right? And heat. I just because sometimes like we talk about things and we walk right past it without really thinking, what does that mean? What does it mean for the Mother of God to live not like the Mother of God? She lives like a little servant girl everywhere she goes, right? That's why if you don't have a relationship with Saint Mary, you're missing out on the greatest example of your life. How can I fight pride when the greatest example of someone fighting pride is not someone I think about? How can I be obedient when the greatest example of obedience is someone I don't have a relationship with? He chose Saint Mary for himself, and he chose her for us, because that's exactly who we needed to fulfill the plan of salvation he has for us. Questions, comments, concerns? There's no way. So you guys don't read books about Saint Mary, and you don't want to ask questions about Saint Mary. All right, fine. I'll put book recommendations on the group when I go home. I don't know titles very well, but there's quite a few books out there that are really good. You can start with like Saint, what? I was literally about to give one. You see how more talking gets you in trouble? That's why we should be like Saint Mary and talk less. There's a book by Saint Ephraim the Syrian of like hymns that are just Saint Mary specific. Sometimes you find it in a bigger hymnology book that he has, and sometimes they sell it just with those hymns. So I think that's a really cool book. What else? Yes.